Invitamos al escenario al señor Mike Nugent, el exdirector y miembro de la Bolsa de Azúcar, Café y Cacao de Nueva York y un referente del comercio cafetalero a nivel internacional. Les ruego que por favor con un fuerte aplauso le demos la más cordial bienvenida al señor Nugent, quien es un veterano de Sintercafé, que incluso estuvo en su edición inicial en la ciudad de San José.
Well, I think we have all the golfers here who wanted to be out on the golf course this morning. It's amazing how much it costs to get this kind of service from the weather people. You know, I'm so happy to be here, but I sincerely hope I never have to participate again in a COVID-era fist bump, or whatever the hell you call those things when you do it with your elbow. I'm so tired of that. So let's all just hug each other forever. God, I've missed being with people, and I'm sure you have too. You know, being in a real place and not being on a Zoom call is so unique now for most of us. Also, not wearing my cargo shorts and my flip-flops with my suit jacket on, but nobody can see it in a board meeting. So, you know, these socks are a new thing for me recently. You know, months ago when I was asked by the board of Sintercafé for the title of my talk to you this morning, I really wasn't sure what my message was going to be. And truth be told, I pulled the title Logistics is a four-letter word out of the air, and only later learned that the meaning of a four-letter word does not translate well into Spanish. So I learned that the literal translation adjusted to logistics is a pebble in your shoe. You know, this doesn't do justice to our present situation. Neither logistics sector, the coffee market, or the world in general are pebbles today. Boulders abound. And if you're not entirely sure why things are best described in four-letter words in the language of Shakespeare, English, turn to someone next to you in the audience here and ask them to share, in a whisper, a four-letter word with you. I won't, because my daughters are here with me today, and they've never heard me use such four-letter words. Well, perhaps with the exception of when they were children and they left a Lego toy on the floor and I walked over it in my bare feet. And I would remind you that ouch, O-U-C-H, is not a four-letter word. So, on the fly, allow me to retitle my talk. Let's change it to just-in-time inventory policy is changing to just-in-case inventory policy. And again, thank you for this opportunity to meet with you this morning. You know, this is a great honor to be here in Costa Rica at Sintercafé. It has a very special place in my heart. You know, I attended the very first Sintercafé meeting. And I want, as I speak to you, I want you to all reflect and try to remember a quote which is attributed to a Dr. Jim Dator of Stanford University. They have a place called the Institute for the Future, which is not the Institute for Futures, which I'm involved in. But Dator said, any useful statement about the future should first seem ridiculous. Well, you know, it's not far off from what Schopenhauer said. He said, truth is allowed only a very short interval of victory, prior to which it's scorned as paradox, and later it's just belittled as trivial. Everybody knows that. So keep both of these ideas in your mind for the next few minutes. And imagine, if we can, that we can time travel. And I'm going to turn back the clock 3 years. And I'm in the process of addressing all of you 3 years ago at Sintercafé. My friends, there's a virus coming, and it's going to kill 6.6 million people around the world over the next 2 years. It'll shut down air travel. It'll bankrupt leisure companies. It'll force cities to quarantine. It'll close schools. It'll have everyone wearing surgical masks and standing no closer than 6 feet apart if you dare go out in public. Restaurants will close. People will wear rubber gloves to pump gas. And households will wash down their groceries before they're brought into the house. And hand washing will become everything we do, and the use of alcohol-based sanitizers would make us all smell like gin and tonics. China would go into a complete lockdown, confining people in their homes. World trade would nearly grind to a halt. But the snarl of logistics with containers in the wrong places and shipping lines refusing to call on ports would boost the price of available space on ships to record levels. And by the way, folks, this is going to last for over 2 years. But don't worry, you'll get used to it. You know, it gets better. 2 years ago, as I'm giving my speech, I'm going to tell you that, by the way, Russia is going to invade the Ukraine. And we're going to have a war in Europe. But Russia is going to come in with such overwhelming force, so confident, that the troops are going to pack their parade uniforms for the surrender ceremonies at Kyiv. But you know what happens? The Ukraine is going to fight back. Little Ukraine, Russia. They're going to drive the Russian army back for month after month, decimating their armor and killing more Russian soldiers than were killed in the entire Afghan war. To punish and deter Russia, serious sanctions are going to be imposed on the nation and the individuals closely associated with President Putin. You're not going to believe this part, but just to add a little spice to the mix, I'm going to predict that soon a 1,300-foot container ship is going to make an illegal right turn in the Suez Canal and embed itself into the bank, closing the canal in both directions. Who would believe such a tale? We all will, because we lived it. This period in which, I've been fantasizing, is a period in which we've all lived. And it's tumultuous. And reflecting on the world as it was pre-COVID and pre-Ukraine and pre-global trade snarl will give you only really a limited understanding of how much we have changed. The world is simply bizarre today. Ukraine, fertilizer, China, COVID, interest rates, inflation, deflation, consumer confidence, energy, our dependence on Russia. What am I missing here? Is it too dry in Brazil, or is it too wet? I've forgotten. How about Colombia? And did I mention that the Mississippi River is drying up? It's historically low levels, and getting crops and materials down from the heartland of America to New Orleans is all snarled up. We're in the company of some great analysts here, dear friends of mine, and perhaps they'll share with you, the future from this point forward with some accuracy. But dare they? Well, I think they will, because they're analysts, they're economists, and they can't help themselves. I won't. But bravo to all of them for they're just very brave souls. Don't lose track that all of this is happening at the same time we're trying to adjust to climate change. And we're endeavoring to move to a cleaner energy and to move towards a more sustainable future. But the invasion of the Ukraine by the global gas station, Russia, reminds us that the global energy system is by far the most complex construction humans have ever created. It consists of an immense combination of exploration, extraction, conversion, transportation, and transmission of different types of energies. It is truly global. It basically knows no boundaries, and it is still growing. This system is not new to us. It's been growing for 150 years. And over the last 30, the growth has simply skyrocketed because of the rise of China and because of the tremendous economic growth made in India and other low-income countries. The basic fact that we have to realize about this global super system is that it's based on fossil fuels for somewhere between 83 and 85% of our global energy, like it or not. But I understand the world wants to reduce the use of fossil fuels due to the damage being done to our global environment, demonstrated by global warming. So, the process of weaning ourselves off and onto alternatives such as wind and solar, well, that's well underway as policy. But the implementation has been lagging. In fact, we are far from being independent of fossil fuels. This is our vulnerability, and our vulnerability has emerged very recently. You know, after Russia invaded Ukraine, we very quickly punished Russia with economic sanctions. And they responded with limitations on natural gas exports to Europe, where they represent 40% of the energy used in industry and heating homes. In Germany, energy availability and cost should have a significant impact on both industry and our private lives, as imports of liquefied natural gas by sea become available, but should become prohibitively expensive. And remember, all of this is occurring during a period of inflation, where not the least of it is being illustrated by the 40-year high in the Consumer Price Index and higher interest rates. Now, trying to understand how all of this happened is important. Remember, it began with the global pandemic and the perceived need to stimulate the U.S. economy locked down by COVID. Here's where perspective of the very serious nature of the problem requires more than a table of numbers. I want to get a grip on the size of the stimulus injection and liquidity into our economy. It's critical to understanding the inflationary outcome that we're experiencing. Taking the U.S. economy as a global driver, use these numbers for perspective, and what is happening today is more easily understood. It's really misleading to talk just about the gross dollars expended. Better to relate stimulus to the gross domestic product of the United States, the economic engine. In the Great Depression of 1930-1940 era, the U.S. government spent about 6% of GDP to stimulate the economy. In subsequent recessions, we generally saw the injections of liquidity roughly in about 1% range. But in 2008, 2009, something we all can remember when the subprime mortgage housing bubble burst, the U.S. engaged in what we called quantitative easing, and that accounted for about 3% of GDP. And it drove interest rates to near zero, where they remained for many years. And then, as mentioned, another black swan in the form of a virus swept across the planet, infecting and killing the most vulnerable and bringing our economy to a near stop. Appropriately, responding to this, the United States injected over $5 trillion. And here's the key number, or roughly 27% of the GDP into the economy. Put this in perspective, each $1 trillion amounts to $8,000 of liquidity for every household in the United States. 5 of them, $40,000 of extra cash in the economy per household. So that now we're paying the piper with soaring inflation and the flames being fanned by a war in Europe should not surprise anybody. And you add to these concerns the specter of global hunger, as supplies of wheat, corn, and vegetable oil hits first the poorest nations that depend on exports from the war-torn Black Sea region. Unrest, sparked by food shortages and prices, is not a new phenomenon, especially in North Africa. Recall the Arab Spring? Hunger is a corrosive to our society, and so is being cold in winter. So what are we doing about the energy issue? As we meet here in Costa Rica, the United Nations, Climate conference COP27 is underway in an Egyptian resort city on the Red Sea. Well, how much progress are they making there this week? You read the news? Apparently not very much. The goals set at the last meeting in Glasgow have not been met. The two new words are being added to our vocabulary. They are greenwashing, which means you're overstating your decarbonization claims, and green hushing, which is a corporate decision not to publish their climate action plans. My takeaway from this meeting in Egypt is that little more has been done to advance the global effort, and that the hot air from the participants will further delay a serious implementation of a solution that gets the planet to a near zero carbon profile. And that hot air is going to get hotter. The president of an African country reportedly pointed the finger at the developed nations, calling his failure to meet carbon goals a clear difference in culpability and capacity between the rich and poor countries of the world. He then called for climate justice for the most vulnerable nations. How soon in the coffee business are we going to hear a call for fertilizer justice from the poorer countries, struggling to feed themselves due to curtailment of shipments of food and fertilizer from Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine? Will we all be forced to make decisions that 2 years ago would have been absolutely bizarre to our well-intentioned social consciences? And will we, in our ultra-woke, developed world, be allowed to ignore the fact that by limiting ourselves to non-fossil fuels, we can alleviate some hunger? Consider this. Statistics from a recent edition of The Economist. A 50% reduction in the grain used for biofuels in Europe and in the US would compensate for all of the lost exports from Ukraine: wheat, corn, barley, and rye. Try suggesting that to a senator from Iowa or the biofuel industry. So what shall we do? Who will be the first politician or corporation to encourage, not discourage, fossil fuel development in order to avoid hunger? Remember, any useful statement about the future should first seem ridiculous. And more to the point of the global coffee industry, how long before we begin to view fertilizer as another issue of conscience, appropriate only to essential food crops and not to what some will describe as luxury crops like coffee, cocoa, or industrial crops like cotton? Remember, any useful statement about the future should first seem ridiculous. Again, I ask, what shall we do? It's a frightened world, and the anxiety levels are matched by the ambiguity of the alternatives. Psychologists call this the paralysis that overcomes us unproductive uncertainty. We're in that period. And most of us are overcome appropriately by fear. We just can't see their way through a moment like this. But others thrive and find positive paths forward. Psychologists suggest that those who do succeed at moments like this open their eyes to all options, both present and the ridiculous, but useful ideas about the future. It's perfectly normal for all of us, when threatened with unproductive uncertainty, to become so focused on the immediate situation that we overlook broader possibilities, and this leads us to rash decisions and lost opportunity. Psychologists, again, they've got a name for everything. They call this status quo bias. Think about this for a minute. We all know that things are always changing. Change is the only constant in our lives. I confirmed that this morning when I looked in the mirror. So open your eyes to all the options, present and future, and keep them open, no matter how unpleasant the view becomes. But at the same time, keep in mind that huge container ship that closed the Suez Canal for 6 days in March 2021 at an estimated cost of $400 million an hour. And recall how surprised we all were when it happened. But now, given how desensitized we are to disaster, it could have been a meteor that closed the Suez Canal and would shrug it off. So what else do we have to worry about or to consider or to work around? The governments of two of the largest coffee producers in the world, Brazil and Colombia, have shifted left in peaceful, democratic processes of election. Bravo. China appears to have moved away from collective leadership by a significant degree. The United States, predicted to be prepared for a tidal wave shift to the right politically, moved only incrementally so this week. It continues to be a weird, wild ride we're all on. And are you aware that the largest German manufacturer of toilet paper has declared insolvency? It's hard not to find an inappropriate word when you're talking about toilet paper in a speech, but I'm going to do my best. The skyrocketing, it all stems from the skyrocketing cost of wood pulp and energy that's impacted their bottom line, and wiped out their profitability. Again, apologies. But now for the good news. They're planning on replacing wood pulp with used coffee grounds in its place. You can't make this stuff up, coffee industry. And so too will we all, as individuals and as companies, adapt to the lessons and the impact of adversity. And adaptation is in our genetic code. It's inherent. It's in our nature to change to survive, and change we will. We'll survive a cold winter in Europe, and just as we always have, and before every war ends, and as this one will. The challenge is to be able to adapt and to fit our business models into the reality of the present, which is also my challenge as a business person focused on reducing risk. But I'm confident that if the toilet paper industry can do it, so can I, and so can you. If you want to see me after the meeting, I'll tell you why. But I want to thank you all for being here today, for sharing your time. This is not just written down in the speech. This is very sincere. The staff and the board of Center Cafe for inviting me to speak. They've done a wonderful job for all of us. But let me leave you with just a few final thoughts. There was a French philosopher, Michel de, I'm probably going to screw his name up, Montaigne. He made a poignant observation. He said, "My life has been full of terrible misfortunes, most of which have never happened." And President Lincoln of the United States was fond of dismissing problems with, "This too shall pass," and it will. So just deal with the most immediate issues before you. Step-by-step solutions to the bigger global problems will emerge. And I just can't resist sharing the French philosopher and a great president of the United States with another great American, Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead. Jerry Garcia wrote in his anthem, Truckin', "What a long, strange trip it has been." It has, and it's far from over. No doubt about it. So just keep on trucking. Thank you. Thank you. I was told that if we had time, I could ask for questions. If you have any, I'd be delighted to try to answer them. No? Good. I survived. Thank you.